Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Pep Talk. My name is Gert-Jan Scheers, and I'll be your host today. Pep Talks are an initiative of WCC, and we aim to facilitate the exchange of knowledge between public employment services all over the world. Today's topic is big data. But let me give you some general information first. This is an interactive webinar, so you can ask questions, and we'll try to answer your questions during the webinar. There's an orange button on your screen which you can use to ask these questions. Immediately after the end of this webinar, you can watch it again because it will be available on demand, and you only have to use the same link as you used to watch it as you're watching it now. During the webinar, we'll ask you some questions and we'll hope you'll give some answers, so we also get some feedback from you and know a little bit more about yourself. Every PES is data, a lot of data, because you store it and you use it for applications. But what if you could use it to improve your processes, if you get new insights, if you can be more effective in what you're doing every day? A good big data strategy or some kind of plan would probably be helpful in that. And that's what we want to do in this pep talk, to give you some ideas and to show you how a plan could be, what parts of the plan are important to have. And maybe we can also use some examples and tell you what to do and what not to do. But when we do that, we'll do that with two people on the left and right hand side. Let me introduce Michel Peters as my co-host. He knows a lot about, because he is involved in a lot of projects in public employment systems. And our special guest today is Dr. Willem Pieterszoon. Welcome, and well, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Gert-Jan. Thank you for having me, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk a little bit about topics that I care about, such as big data. Part-time, I work for an academic research center, the Center for E-Government Studies, where we help governments with their research. We support them by doing academic research around topics such as innovation, technology, organization. The rest of my time I spend helping organizations putting that in practice. So developing data strategies, developing technology strategies, developing better service delivery strategies. And fortunately, a lot of public employment services organizations I've worked with within the European Commission or across the world. So I hope we can get some examples on using big data, working with big data, and especially the struggles and pitfalls as we use big data within governments and specifically public employment service organizations. Let's get started, and this is sort of an overview of the things that I would like to go through today. First, let's talk a little bit about what is big data, and it's been a hype for a couple of years now. People have been talking about big data for several years, but let's take a step back and put our foot in the sand. What is it really? What are we talking about when we're talking about big data, and how is it different from data that we used to have, let's say, 10 years ago? Approaches to using big data, why would you use it, and what are things that we think in potential could be beneficial to public employment service organizations as they adopt big data and the underlying data analytics. And then I would say the most important one, let's get started. What should you do, and what is it you shouldn't be doing when you're thinking about or using big data and big data analytics? And then lastly, if we have some time, beyond getting started. So you've experimented with big data, you have some cool results, and you've shown them to your organization, and
then what?
Then what? Which is sort of tricky in many cases. Let's talk about big data, and let's talk about some numbers, and let's illustrate sort of the hype, because these are some numbers that I pulled from many of those flashy consulting reports that you see in on the internet. And the big one in the top left corner is the number of savings that some research agency predict that we could realize within the public sector in Europe.
It's a very big number.
It's a very big number. They say we can save up to 100 billion euros in annual cost by improving our processes using big data.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's realistic. I'm a little skeptical, especially because we have very little organizations doing this and saving actual money yet. But it does point to some potential, and even if we only save 10 billion a year, then we still have saved quite a lot of money.
Would be big as well. Yeah.
A big part of the hype comes from the amount of data that we're developing. So amount of data doubles every year. So the amount of data that we generate with each other every year doubles. So it's an exponential curve. So more and more and more data, and more data. And leads to opportunities. And I think that's in part where this hype around big data is coming from. But is it new? I would say it's probably not.
No, I wouldn't say so either. It's been around for, I don't know, 50, 60 years.
Yeah.
Gathering of data. No, it's not new. But what can you do with it?
Well, I guess that's one of the key challenges, and we know that public employment organizations were among the first organizations in the world to start adopting things like mainframes and databases, and have been storing data for 50, maybe 60 years now. And they have a lot of data. They've always had lots of data. So big data in the concept of just having a lot of data is not really new. What is new, and very often people refer to this as the 3 V's, is various aspects of the data. So it's not just the volume, it's also the variety of data. So we don't just have, job seeker profiles and vacancies. We gather a lot more data. We gather data from online behaviors of our clients. We get customer contact center data that we have. We have data generated by the processes that we have running in a public employment service organization.
Web forms, questionnaires, feedback from the support center.
Exactly.
Lots of data.
The list goes on and on and on. So a variety of data leads to new potential applications and improvement of processes. Lastly, the velocity of data. So we were already talking about the doubling of data every year. The speed in which we generate data increases. We get more data, creating opportunities to monitor processes, improve processes sort of on the fly. I think that's very new about the way we currently approach big data. So we see the shift in thinking about data from data just being something that is being stored in a warehouse and it's being used once a year to generate a business intelligence report, to something that lives and breathes and is being used to solve organizational goals.
And have the computing power to handle it.
I think that's
it's huge.
I think that's a big component of it, indeed. I would like to take it one step further and would like to emphasize that we shouldn't be just talking about big data as sort of like a goal. Big data is not an end. Big data is a means to do stuff, and that means is part of a bigger equation. In the end, I feel we should be talking about smart data, which is the combination of using big data plus having concrete goals. I mean, you need to get some kind of utility out of your data. If you're just, analyzing data for the sake of analyzing data, there's no real point in it, right? But you also need to make sure your data is well organized, because else it's messy and you can't really use it. So semantics and organization are very important. Data quality, you need to have good data that you can use to say something about job seekers and employers and other stakeholders and parts of the organization. Lastly,
this is where a PES usually also struggles. They say we have data, but we've looked at it. On some parts, it might not be that good. So data quality, we would like to get more data quality in. So that's something that we can advise on as well.
Yeah, and I think it's a realistic challenge that public employment service organizations have, and many that I know from my practice, a lot of the work into applying big data and big data analysis goes into making sure you have high quality data. So it's a big struggle.
Yeah.
Lastly, and I would say that's especially important for public organizations as well, is security, privacy, protecting the privacy of the job seekers, making sure that nobody loses USB drives with confidential data and those kinds of things. So in the end, we should be thinking about not just the data, not just the volume of the data, but a lot of stuff that comes tagged along with the data and move towards smart data.
Can you define more precisely if you say high quality? It's a very abstract thing. What do you mean? What is not high quality and what is high quality data?
I would say the quality of the data depends on a lot of things. So, for example, the completeness of the data. So, if you were to if you have an online registration form for a job seeker, but you don't store every data point from every job seeker, for example, because fields are mandatory, you end up having a lot of missing data in your data set. If you have a lot of missing data and you run analytics, you might not be able to say valid things about the entire population. Also has to do with the organization of your data. If you have data stored in different formats and you need to spend a lot of time organizing those data and streamlining the data, then quality becomes an issue. So how can you use data and how can you apply data? In general, we see that there are sort of two ways in which organizations are looking at data and are using data to solve problems in the organization. The first is, hey, we have a concrete problem in the organization. So, for example, in public employment organizations, job matching doesn't work. We keep on having a lot of vacancies. We keep on having a lot of job seekers. Somehow it doesn't really work for us to put one and one together and get people to get the jobs that we have. So this is where data could jump in, and you could say like, hey, maybe we need to look beyond formal taxonomies, and maybe we should start including broader profiles, like psychographic data or cultural data about companies to create better algorithms. So that's where you have a concrete problem that you need to solve and where data can help. The other one is the sort of more innovation and learning approach, like, hey, we have this data. We have a warehouse with terabytes and terabytes of data. Are there things we can do with this data that we can learn from and create better processes and create better services? And even though this is sort of like a semantical difference in looking at those problems, the implication for how you use this in the organization are huge. I mean, if you want to innovate with data, you don't need a unit that's really part of the organization. You don't need to be embedded in processes as much. If you are solving organizational problems, you need to have a data team that is part of the organization, that has buy-in from the organization, that has liaisons with the processes in the organization. So depending on what you want to do, the approach to embedding the data team or the people running the analytics becomes very different. So that's something to keep in mind as you start thinking about what is it we want to get done with big data, and then what are the implications for the organization.
In my experience, it's also doing the observations, having good interpretations, and getting a theory out isn't solving it yet, because the theory needs to become in practice.
Right.
And especially a PES also has problems in how can I safely apply my theory in the production environment, in the e-government service that I have.
Right.
How can I make sure that I test my theory somehow before I launch it and say, okay, this is the next best?
Yeah. Well, and that's where it's probably not a bad idea to have a more secluded team that can test theories and make sure that whatever they find is good before going to your organization and say like, hey, we have a solution for your problem.
It's a setup of the infrastructure, but we'll get to that.
We'll get to that in a little bit as
I'll
well.
have a question from the audience, and it goes back, I think, about the quality of data, missing data. How do you get quality data without bothering the client or the job seeker with endless questions?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, obviously, there's always ways to see if you can get data from another source. So maybe you can share data with other governmental organizations so that, for example, you don't have to check for addresses or that kind of stuff. So if data is available in another government source, then that would be an option to start thinking about integrating those data sources so that you don't have to re-ask the client. If there is no other way to get the data, you may have to ask the client, or you need to make the decision that the data is not important to justify asking job seekers or employers for this data.
You could also help the client fill out more data without steering the customer towards an answer, because that's always risky to do. But making fields mandatory that you find are needed within your analysis where they were previously not. That's also an example. And in ways you won't have to ask, but the next data coming in would be better. So
it also really depends on, for example, the usability and user friendliness of forms that you have online to help stimulate clients to deliver the right information. And so if you have ambiguous questions, if you have ambiguous labels, you'll see that job seekers make way more mistakes in filling out forms, leading to low quality data. So making sure that your input works well and that your forms are designed well is a very important part in making sure that the quality you get in your systems is proper. Let's look at some potential applications, because we've been talking in abstract terms about big data and potential savings. Let's look at some ways where we see, because not a lot of PES are really doing this yet, but let's look at some ways where we see the potential, having brainstormed about this. For PES, I would say...
Vacancy matching. To me, that's an obvious one. Of course, WCC invests in this. We invest in it heavily in two ways. We do feel that curating data and having control over your data is key in any case. But only having the curated data means that you're losing out on the impact and the potential of big data usage. And I always tell my customers, I feel the best solution is a hybrid solution.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where you can curate and manage your data, but you have a feed that is based on real data. That's based on analysis that's feeding your system.
Yeah.
And but you don't want to be that as a black box.
Yeah.
You want to have control over
Right.
it. And that's where, especially with vacancy matching, we already have software that's doing this, and we see the benefits of it.
Well, I can tell from my experience that for many PAS around the world, vacancy matching and improving matching, and to some degree the underlying algorithms is very high on the agenda. And we see the potential for, using newer types of data that have not been used yet. For example, about profiles, the more softer characteristics of job seekers and employers, to make sure that job seeker fits the culture of an employer, that kind of stuff. That's where we see the potential for improved vacancy matching. Fraud detection, I would say, is a logical candidate, especially for those PAS that also do benefits administration.
Yep.
Fraud detection obviously is one of those key big data applications that originated from banks and insurance companies and is now being used in the public sector predominantly by tax administrations. They spend a lot of energy in making sure, in finding those people that are more likely to commit fraud, finding the people that have actually committed fraud by using smart algorithms. And we can see that application for those benefit PASs as well, to make sure that finding people that get
will
benefits.
Probably save a lot of money if you do that right. Yeah.
Well, this is one of those areas where cost savings are realistic and have potential.
Yeah.
Thirdly, new channels for service delivery. What I mean by this is that the data and algorithms create opportunities to automate processes and create new service channels based on this automation. Think about chatbots. Think about conversational bots. Think about the Siris and OK Googles and Cortanas, this intelligent agents that could lead to new service channels for public employment service organizations. For example, an intelligent assistant that walks a job seeker through its entire process from registering, onboarding, profiling, matching, finding courses and trainings to increase their capabilities. But also in more simple terms, I know that many PASs are looking into chatbots, conversational bots to improve service delivery. And that's where you need the data in the background and you need the smart algorithms to fuel those channels. Training, counseling, doing better recommendations for job seekers about the types of programs or training activities they should be doing to improve their profiles is, I think, a big one. So predictive analytics, recommender systems, and those kinds of things. But also think about augmented or virtual reality applications where you could simulate a job interview with a potential application. So instead of sitting in a cold, public employment service office, you could simulate being at the desk of a CEO of a company where you might want to apply for a job. Lastly, providing better labor market predictions. So it's not just about supplying data to the Ministry of Labor that says, well, this is what the thing is going to happen, but also for your own purposes, knowing where labor will happen in the next, what the developments will be. Is unemployment going to rise? Is it going to lower? What's the shift of labor across the country so that we can improve mobility of our job seekers? So making sure that you create more actionable ALMPs in your organization based on those predictions.
Yeah, and get it out of the high level labor market predictions. Get it to customer specific. Yeah?
I agree with you.
But isn't in looking in old data, looking in the back mirror, trying to figure out where you have to go? Isn't that?
It is hard, but what they say, what the potential of big data is that once again, by combining different types of data, you can triangulate your data so you can verify one piece of data with another piece of data. So potentially you can create more accurate models. Because you have big data, you can start slicing and dicing and create several models on the same data set that you run in parallel and then cross compare those to see which one is providing the most accurate prediction. So you have a lot more opportunities to create models and compare those models simply because you have so much data and data of such high variety.
I'm very interested in knowing, finding out what the viewers think about this. So we have a small poll. Please use a few seconds to make your choice, because we mentioned 5 applications, and which application is in your organization the most interesting? Please vote now.
Are they able to select more than one? Because I would pick all of those.
You picked all of it. Yeah, you can't put any priorities on things. You are a researcher, I suppose.
Oh, right. My
Let's
interest
go
is
to
too
the
broad.
next slide.
Let's move on. Let's get practical. So okay, you have this idea of in your public employment organization. Let's get started. How do you start with applying big data and getting analytics to go? This may sound a little obvious, but the first step would really be to create a plan. What is it you want to get done? And I see too many organizations, including public employment organizations, that say, we want to do something with big data because it's cool.
That's jumping on the hype.
Right.
That's not getting effective results.
But it's not how you should be doing it. I think the correct way to do it is to sort of pick between those approaches that we talked about before. So do we have a concrete business problem? Do we have a process that's failing or is not going as well as we think it should be? Is customer satisfaction low? Is job matching not working well? Does our profiling seem to be not lining up with other things that we do? Are job seekers unhappy with the sort of like counseling that we provide them? So is there a concrete business problem where you feel pain, where you should start looking into data solutions? Or is it more along the lines of like, hey, we have this data, we want to learn, we want to experiment, maybe we want to have a chat robot in a couple of years from now. Let's start playing with this and create a sort of data team that can start experimenting with the sort of solutions that we're thinking about. I think that's a very fundamental question and has big implications for the team that you hire and where you put them in the organization. So think about those things first.
Put them in the organization, you say, but do you really have to do all this stuff in your organization? You may not have this knowledge inside your organization. Could you also?
I think there's a lot of parts of this process you can outsource. I think it would be very smart to get some help while you figure this out, to help clarify the problems that you have and clarify the potential for experimentation, learning, innovation. But beyond that, I think a lot of the data stuff you can do yourself. I mean, you can build a big server where you run your analytics. It also makes sense to outsource a big part of it to, get a cloud service provider, maybe not to store your data because that's sensitive, but to maybe run your analytics or so. Get some data scientists on your own team, but also get some external help. So there's a lot of, very flexible solutions. My advice would be to really start small and start learning, experimenting, because this is so new and you'll run into data issues really quickly and early on. So start small and start sort of external and then start weaving this into your internal organization. So invite some people over and start talking.
If you think about the concrete business problem, I have also a question here from people. One of our viewers says, can you give an example in which way big data will actually help a caseworker to support an individual job seeker? Or is big data mainly used on a group level?
No, I can think of several ways in which a caseworker works with job seekers.
I have an excellent example at the UWV, the Dutch PES. They have been starting on big data. They made some excellent progress already. And they have internal reports on a customer level, and where they present the caseworker with this information that can then translate to the job seeker, and present the job seeker with insights for his or her situation at that point in time. So based on his or her resume, based on his or her situation, where they live, what's the current potential in the market, and they advise the job seeker accordingly. And they already know that a lot of job seekers really appreciate this insight. So that's a practical use. Well, that's not an e-government service, but it's a practical use of supporting a caseworker with big data info.
Yeah, I also think about things like very personalized recommendations for types of trainings or counseling that a job seeker could benefit from. So instead of going from, you're a carpenter, maybe you should consider switching to another trade. You can provide very specific recommendations about very specific programs at very specific colleges that people can apply to make sure that they fit into another job category much better. So things like personalization, profiling could really benefit from those analytics applications, I think. Some more stuff. Well, when do you call your project successful? What's the timeline? And obviously, you need to get some funding, which is.
Well, just tell them you'll save $100 billion for them.
I think that's part of creating a good business case in general and selling it internally. But creating this plan is really a solid starting point, at least in getting the conversation going in the organization.
Do you have experience with the return on investment in such a plan?
It's really hard, and it depends on, here again, it depends on what you're trying to solve. And so if you have a concrete business problem that you are trying to solve and you have results, then creating a business case and an ROI setting is a lot easier. In practice, this is very hard because you're improving part of a process and very often just a very tiny part of a process. So saying something about an entire process is really hard, and this is a struggle. So you need to convince the stakeholders internally that it's going to be a good investment without a guaranteed ROI. That's why we pull out these big numbers from all the reports and say like, hey, potential savings of 100 billion a year. Yeah. Okay. But because not a lot of PEZs are doing this, we unfortunately don't have a lot of case studies supporting actual ROI. It'll happen in a couple of years. Creating your team, and well, Gert-Jan, you already mentioned this. So DIY, do yourself, or get help. Especially here, this is important. So what are the number of people that you want to bring in to start analyzing data and organizing data, and to what extent do you want to outsource it? Depends on your ambitions, depend on if you want to experiment or learn or solve concrete business problems. If you do it for the long haul, I would start by bringing people on board. But the problem is that you're going to need a lot of people, because big data is not just about, doing some statistics and hiring a statistician. You need more people on board to make this a solid endeavor. Think about, data engineers, people that organize your data, that extract your data, to make sure that you get data out of your warehouse in a sort of proper kind of format. You need the data scientists, people that build the models, that run the models, that create the algorithms, and then compare them and test them and make sure that you have valid outcomes. You might want to even think about social scientists, so the people that understand the theories, that understand what's going on, the labor market, that understand what goes on in the organization, to make sure that you interpret your results correctly and then apply them appropriately. So there's, depending on where you are and what you want to do, you need different kinds of people. What I do want to say, which is, I would say one of the key lessons, is the integration with the business and making sure that you have good relationships with the business. Because very often we see that, you have a team of data scientists and they
are put somewhere in the back.
Put them in a room, put some data in and expect a solution. But those people don't speak the language of the organization, and you don't speak their language. So business liaisons and buy-in from managements, those are really the topics that you should be concerned about right now. And that's something that I would advise any PEZ who wants to start doing this to start doing early on. Build those relationships with the managers, with the process owners, with the product owners, even with the C-suite up in the organization, to make sure that you have the buy-in, that you have the support. Because there's nothing as annoying as hiring a data engineer and then you have an IT manager who's like, yeah, we'll give you access to the data warehouse in 4 or 5 months when we have time.
Yeah.
So you need to buy in from the organization, and you need to integrate well.
Yep, clear.
Creating a data catalog.
Tell us, what is a data catalog?
Data catalog is a label, but what this step is about is knowing what you have. Yeah. What data do you have in-house? And you'll be surprised, but I was in a session with a bunch of PEZ last year in Croatia in a European project, and we were talking about, do you know what you have? And most PEZ were like, we really don't have any idea. We have a warehouse with some stuff in it, but it's not really that well organized and it's not really cataloged well. But beside the warehouse, we have stuff in our processes, and there's a database with some knowledge that we put on our website, and there's a database here and a database there, and we don't really know what we have.
You have your general reporting. You will probably look at your vacancies and your resumes. But other than that, are you measuring your website? If yes, where does this data go, and do you link it
Right.
towards usage and data in?
Yeah. So it's something that most organizations forget to do, but knowing what you have is an incredibly important step in finding results and getting data in the first place.
Yeah, of course.
So what you should be doing is spend some time and go in the organization, which will also help in getting the buy-in from the organization, and start figuring out what it is you have. So how many records do I have? What variables do I have in these records? What kind of data points do I have in these records? Is it just, names of job seekers and how long they've been unemployed, or do I have a bunch more? And that greatly determines A, what you can do with your analytics, and B, what kind of activities you need to do to get the data you need to start running your models and your analytics.
Good.
I'm not going to talk about all these properties because we don't have the time, but we can read those on the slides.
I have some answers, by the way, from people. Not too many people really know what they want, I think, because we only have 7 people who reacted. So we have to do with that. But as expected a little bit from us, that vacancy matching, 43%, but also providing labor market prediction, 43%. So they are both at the same level. People do want to use it for labor market predictions. And we have one person who says, okay, new channels for service delivery would also be interesting. But the fraud detection and the training counseling,
Okay.
not so much yet.
I think it makes sense because benefits. Not every PES supplies is a benefits provider, so I can see it there not being the most high on
And
the
there
list.
are some balances and checks already in, but you could do more by analyzing the data to find fraud that you don't know of.
Yeah.
But that's I can see that's being.
Or could that be
a
another
big
part
step.
of the organization that people who...
Yeah, that's usually that is another part.
It's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm not surprised by the vacancy matching because it's high on the agenda.
Yeah.
Providing labor market information is a little bit more surprising to me, but it's certainly a very relevant and useful application.
Yeah.
Shall we move on?
Yes.
We shall move on. Let's talk about infrastructure. So suppose you have, you know what you have. You have some people on staff or you have outsourced, you're working with a consulting provider to help you analyze data. Now you need infrastructure. So you need a place to store your data. So you're obviously not going to go to the warehouse and hook your laptop up to the warehouse and run your analytics on the data warehouse itself. You need to have a place to store the data while you run the analytics. So you need to have a machine somewhere that stores data, and you can do that in-house. So you can buy some server racks and put it in your office, or maybe you want to put it in the cloud. Depends on the kind of data you have. I mean, if you have sensitive information, if you start working with social security numbers, for example, which I don't recommend for doing, but you don't want to put that in a cloud at an external provider because of the earlier said.
PES would be hesitant to do.
Yeah, and it's not the very smart thing to do. So if you work with sensitive data, if you work with more sensitive, privacy-sensitive data, do it in-house. Else, it's not a bad idea to consider outsourcing some of that hosting, because very often it's cheaper than setting up your own infrastructure. And especially if you start experimenting, then the cloud might not be a bad place to start. Same applies to analytics capability. You need machines, you need heavy machines to run
Computing
your
power,
models.
yeah.
So those are all things, they're very practical things to think about. Like, do you have budget to set up your own analytics infrastructure? Or should you just be practical and get an AWS and Amazon server where you can just run it virtually in a cloud again? You need to start thinking about, okay, I have a data catalog, I know what I have. I need to get that data in my system. So I need to have the willingness and the cooperation of the parts of the organization that need to supply me this data. So that might imply that I need to hook up to the place where I host the website to get all the data from the website to start analyzing those data. So there's a lot of steps that you need to go through to actually get to where you want to be. And I think one of maybe the second key lesson here is big data requires a lot of work before you can actually start using big data and start seeing results. There's a lot of stuff that happens before you get there. And one of the biggest ones of those is this one, organizing data. I found, and there's some even academic studies supporting this, that data scientists and data engineers spend up to 90% of their time just organizing data. And very often that's simple stuff, like you have one database that has dates formatted in month, day, year, and you have another one that has day, month, year. They need to talk together, so you need to organize it. You need to clean it. You need to sanitize it, so get rid of all the stuff that you don't want to have, like names or social security numbers. You need to clean the data, so if there's noise in it, if there's missing values and all kind of stuff that need to go out. This takes up a lot of time and a lot of energy. So very often, when working with clients, you start a project and you're like, well, we're going to experiment with big data. We're going to build a better algorithm for something. And after like 4 weeks, the CEO walks in and is like, well, do we have results yet? No. And then you're still organizing your data. So expectation management around such processes is extremely important. And you should safely calculate several months of work and hard labor to get all the data organized and cleaned in such a way so that you can actually use those data. So think about this, and as you build your timeline in your plan, make sure you reserve enough time in your timeline to do these kinds of activities, because they're very labor intensive. You need a lot of manpower and a lot of time to get this right.
When you as a PES, and you know, that's probably not 50 people. You know, you may be having a very small group of people who are doing this. So it would be nice to share, and I see a question here from the audience is, in which way can PES learn from each other while using big data?
I think learning from each other makes a lot of sense. I would encourage PES to start having those conversations together about not just the potential of big data, but also share those experiences. Like you can develop, you know, practices and even scripts on how to sanitize data and organize data, and might not be a bad idea to start thinking how we can facilitate those discussions. Because in the end, you know, a lot of PESs will have similar types of information about their job seekers. Jobs itself, vacancies are very often, like using taxonomies like ESCO and stuff, are being organized in similar ways. So the situations of the PESs will be comparable in some ways. Of course, they're unique in many other ways, but there is a lot of room for them to learn from each other. So
I think the base of information would probably be the same, and organizing it, sharing helps to not try it all on your own, but to learn from each other. Yeah. How far did you get? We want to start. What did you do? What works? What doesn't work?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Think about the tools that you can use to organize and clean your data and all these kinds of things.
Yeah.
Another interesting question that I want to ask you is, big data is often seen as an IT-related topic.
Yeah.
It's all about finding, gathering, storing, organizing bytes. We all heard it before. Is it fair to say that having what you called a social scientist is key to success? In other words, the one that can turn the data into chocolate? Where in the PES would these people reside?
I would say absolutely. I would absolutely say that big data is not, for me, an IT topic. Very often it lives close to IT. It needs to have close relationships to
Probably
IT.
Based on the 90% investment by the people that know how to format and sanitize and clean data. And those are usually the types that are not the business types. Yeah. They are behind their computers and they are doing a lot of work. And the end result is something that you definitely want to use in your business part of the PES.
Right.
So
in the end, it is about building solutions that help the business. So in that sense, I would recommend that your big data or your analytics team lives very close to the business processes, because that's where it happens, that's where the action is, and that's where you can use the results. So it would be a mistake to put it under IT or next to IT. It needs to live near the business, and that's where you need to have the social scientists that understand the business and the context, but also business liaisons that speak the language of the rest of the organization.
Yep. For me, business liaisons would be key, even more than the scientists. I think business liaisons key, because usually the manager of a labor market information analytics department that's the person who can speak or relate to the board, to other managers, to the business. But the people crunching the data, they don't speak the same language. So you need your business liaisons, especially there. Make it one team. Don't separate that.
Well, I have a question for you again. We're very curious, and have you already started using big data in your organization? Do you already have a plan? And we have 5 answers for you, so please take time and give your answers. And we're very curious about this point.
Move on a little bit and then go a little bit faster.
Yes.
The next 2 points we can be brief about because most organizations will not be here yet, but it's something worth mentioning and thinking about. You have your data, you have your team, you have your infrastructure, and then you need to start analyzing the data, which means that you need to do a lot of stuff in terms of, the analytics, the statistics, the creation of models, interpreting results, which on the one hand seems like a very technical kind of exercise, but this again is one of those areas where I feel that, social scientists and including the business can really help in understanding what's going on. So suppose you run a model, you create an algorithm to so you want to improve matching, you create an algorithm and you create 2 or 3 of those and you compare those, talking to the business about what's going on and making sense of what you see in the data is crucial. So this again points to my recommendation that data and data analytics should be part of the business and the business process. But this is the more sort of like nerdy step of the process. And this is sort of like to the heart of where big data and analytics get. It's also a very fun one.
If you run your model, who is going to interpret if it adds value, if it's usable in a business term?
Right.
Exactly.
Here you need to team up definitely.
Yeah. Lastly, you need to report some results. And this is not about, writing a PDF and putting it in a drawer somewhere. This is about talking to the organization and saying like, hey, we have some data, we have some outcomes, and we can create a static report in like a PowerPoint, or we can create a more interactive, dashboard, like a Tableau kind of solution where we show what we find and show the outcomes, and then have the discussion to the people about, what can you do with this data? Think about those labor market predictions. Is it useful to have sort of an interactive dashboard even for the individual caseworker that could use this to do better recommendations, for example? So thinking about what kind of format, depending on the problem you have, the users, the level of detail, are all very relevant questions in thinking about how to present the results of your initial exercises. Are we going to do results yet?
Very few people dare, it seems. Or maybe we will get some more results, but for now, we have only one person who answered. And he says, yes, we analyze data and apply it in our processes.
Okay, very
Fantastic.
good.
At least one.
That's fantastic. I would expect a lot of no's there. So now you have data. You have results. You have reported it. You have done some fiddling around with some stuff. Now what? In the long run, I would say that we need to get to, and this is sort of the heart of the discussion that we've been having so far, data should be part of the organization. You should strive to making this part of the processes, have this strong relationship with IT to get the data that you need and sort of create this, what I like to call the ID data feedback loop. Ideally, you have systems and processes that do something, that generate data that you can use to look at what's going on in these processes and use those results to create better IT solutions that then create new data that you can then create to build new models. So ideally, you would want to make this in the long run sort of a continuous process in the organization, which would plead to PEZs and other organizations developing those capabilities in the long run themselves so they can make this a continuous process in the organization. That also makes, to me, data a very important driver of innovation and learning in the organization, especially if you do it ongoing, because you can keep on adjusting and changing the things that you do. So ultimately, big data is a part of reimagining those public employment organizations, I hope. So let's look at some key learnings before we wrap up. As I've said several times before, big data is a means, it's not an end. So doing something with big data for the sake of doing something with big data is the wrong way to go. You need to start by looking at goals. Yep. And big data may or may not be the solution or part of the solution to that problem. Number two, big data is much less about the data itself than people think. It's a lot about getting the organization to collaborate, making sure you get the right data, you integrate the data. So in the end, big data is really about changing the organization and changing about how the organization functions and how the organization thinks about the interaction of technology, processes, people, and innovation. So don't see it as just a single exercise in playing around with data, but see it as a way to improve the organization. And that implies organizational change. And that's where a lot of organizations get stuck, because you have outcomes, you have results, but then the organization won't adopt it. So make sure that you get those, business consultants on board, or people who understand the business and can help develop the business according to this new way of thinking.
Translate whatever is the outcome so that management decides to go for it.
Yeah. Big data takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. Many people think.
We hope not, but.
Yeah, maybe in the future when we have a lot of experience and we have built all the tools, it becomes easy. But very often people compare it to doing a survey, where it's like, well, you go out, you ask some questions, you get some results, you play around for a week, and then you have a report. That's not how big data works. Getting the data, organizing the data, takes a lot of time, and it takes way more energy than you think it does. So manage those expectations from the get-go. It's very important. Lastly, and then I'll stop talking. I am convinced of the potential, the tremendous potential, including those potentials for public employment service organizations in improving processes and creating better matching, profiling, recommendations, all these kinds of things. I think now is the time to start thinking about big data and how you can apply it. So my recommendation would be start now, start thinking about it, start playing with it.
But even start small.
Start small, just start.
Yeah.
And I would adopt a mantra that especially VDAB in Belgium has also adopted, like fail fast and fail often.
Yeah.
Do it, start experimenting, start learning, start building capability. And as you learn and as you go, you'll make a lot of mistakes, but in the end it'll pay off. And they are doing a fantastic job in using data in their innovation lab. Yeah. And that's really an example that I would follow as if I were another PES. So those... I'll hand this back to you.
Thank you. We have one thing that we like to mention is that in the past year we asked a lot of people from all over the world working for PES or working in the PES domain to write articles about what do you see is happening and how should we in the PES domain develop what's going on. We have about 10 articles. We put them in a book, and very soon, within 1 or 2 weeks, we'll be able to ship it. And we're very interested to know if you would be happy to receive one of these books. It will give a good overview from people from Australia to Korea to America to Europe about all kinds of insights in this domain and what they think will happen in the coming years. Another thing that we mentioned is that we like to support PES in the exchange of knowledge. We try to put together all kinds of information. We started with all the pep talk information, but we are also going to publish parts of the book on this site. And we also hope that in the future, PES people will contribute, and maybe we can develop it into a platform where we can exchange knowledge also when we don't have pep talks. So that's our aim, and we'll try to invest and help you in that. And that's something we'd like to put to your attention. If you want other people to find out about this pep talk or any other pep talk, this platform also gives access to these pep talks. So that's also a tool you can use to exchange knowledge. You've heard a lot in the last 45 minutes. It may be confusing, it may be challenging. Set that first step. We're thinking about organizing a workshop in which you could make a start. And we're very interested in finding out if you're interested in a workshop. So please tell us now if you would like to join us and would be interested in such a workshop. Then, I thank everybody for watching this webinar, this pep talk. At the end, there is still a questionnaire in which you can give some feedback, in which you can also indicate if you want a copy of the book. And of course, I want to thank my co-host. Thank you
Glad
very
to be
much
here again.
for this
Sure.
show again. And of course, our guest speaker, thank you very much for giving all this information.
Of course.
And, I know it's a start and it may be confusing, but I think it's an important issue that you really should be starting with.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, I thank the audience for being with us all the time. I see that nobody has switched off yet, so that's a good thing to know also. And I hope it was a valuable 45 minutes for you to be with us and spend this time. And again, in case you want to watch it again, it is available on demand, or share it with other people so that this information gets shared by a lot of people in Pesland. Thank you again, and hopefully see you the next time.
Thanks.